President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama have officially endorsed Vice President, now presidential candidate. Can I say that now? Kamala Harris? Presumptive nominee, Kamala Harris. Nathan Dean, Bloomberg Intelligence senior policy analyst, joins us now. Nathan, the last sort of, lever falls into place for Kamala Harris. What can we expect over the weekend?
So I'm actually hoping that we don't expect all that much. I mean, after 2 weekends, of having really big news. But, the next thing for us really is to try and figure out who Kamala Harris is going to pick as her vice presidential candidate. The betting markets, which you can find in the terminal at WSL election, are really suggesting it's coming down to Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona and Senator Josh Shapiro out of Pennsylvania. Senator Cooper and Senator Bashar out of North Carolina and Kentucky being the others. But, just remember that Kamala Harris has a lot of time. The Chicago election isn't until August 22nd, and that's when she actually has to pick that vice presidential nominee. So, I'm thinking that they may take some time on this. The news cycle is worth them right now. Maybe they're going to play that up again. So I'm thinking for the next week or so, it could be just more back to what we originally thought, just a campaign for the presidency.
What does history teach us? I mean, Pennsylvania, Shapiro, 19 delegates there?
Yeah, so I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but, for the Democrats, really, it's this idea of the Rust Belt, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. The other type of swing states...
I just want to... I should have follow up with my actual question. Picking a vice presidential candidate, does that really move the needle for the person who's on the top of the ticket? Does it matter?
Yeah, I think it would matter at a specific state level. So if you go with Josh Shapiro, obviously I think you're going to get a boost because he's really popular in the state of Pennsylvania. But just to remember that we're also talking about the vice presidential picks here. When it comes to policy and the one debate that's between the vice president, historically it's usually people don't go to the polls to vote for the vice president. They go to the polls and they go to the ballots to vote for the president. So, there's a lot of focus on the VP candidates, and certainly we cover at BI in terms of how they could ultimately influence policy and so forth like that. But, at the end of the day, when people go to November, they're going to be voting for either President Trump or Vice President Kamala Harris.
When do we think we're going to get real policy initiatives from Kamala Harris? I appreciate that in her first sort of campaign speech, she's not going to do that. Like, her goal is to get everyone jazzed up and excited. When do you think we're going to start to hear more specifics?
I actually don't think it's going to come all that too soon. I mean, when we went back to look at some of their policy statements, we had to go all the way back to our time as Attorney General as California. And I think August, they're just going to focus more so on this idea of, the vice presidential pick. And I think you'll see a little bit more on border and a little bit more on immigration. But when it comes to her economic policy, foreign relations and so forth like that, I think we aren't going to see the specifics until we get to September, which is the debate season. And so after Labor Day, after the August recess, I think Americans will really be paying attention to the race then. And at that point, Kamala Harris is going to have to explain those policy positions. I think the next 2 weeks or so, they're just going to try and figure it out. Just because, remember, her campaign is only, 4 days old, 5 days old at this point? So I think there's still a lot of baby steps that campaign has to do. And then we'll see more and more of the policy statements, I think, towards Labor Day and maybe even to September at that point.
Do you know how long we have to wait before we get really good polling data?
I think it's the first. We've already started to see the first polls that have come out post the Biden decision, but it's early and it's at a national level. I think some more of the state polling data that was more important to us in terms of Pennsylvania, Arizona, and so forth like that, that's being conducted this week. And so I think, and please don't hold me to this, it'll probably be the tail end of next week when we start to see that.
Do we trust polls now, John Tucker? Is that something that we do?
Dewey defeated Truman, didn't he?
But okay. It was a little bit ago, though. So when it comes to the campaign, is the campaign infrastructure for President Biden, is that infrastructure set up for Kamala Harris right now to do what she needs to do and travel a lot and do a lot of rallies and get her name out there?
According to them, yes, but I would say just, it's also, you have the ground staff, but you also have the leadership staff. And I think the leadership staff is going to obviously change, if not in direct positions, but in terms of influence. I mean, look, Vice President Harris had a campaign back in 2020. It didn't go so well for her. She was one of the first people to drop out of the Democratic nomination process. However, the Democratic Party is fairly aligned at this point. And so I think that there are other people out there who are certainly interested, if not serving in the campaign, but at least be able to whisper into that campaign. So I think what's happening right now is that, obviously they're going through this growth. they didn't really have much of a plan up until Sunday or maybe a few days beforehand. So I think they'll have another week or two, but then, come August, early August, mid-August, I think they'll be fine in terms of moving forward.
Is there going to be a debate? Is that a sure thing?
Well, I certainly think so. I mean, look, if President Trump, were to back out with one of the dates, the September 10th date, if I recall correctly, is still moving forward. And I think they've invited both candidates for a September 17th debate. And look, if one of the candidates at this point decides to drop out, I think that's a serious mistake on their part. But, it's Washington politics. Anything can happen. But I think at this point, certainly they'll entertain it. And I think ultimately they'll have one, if not two, debates going forward.
Oh, boy. We're definitely watching that.
Well, I'm more interested in, the forum that it's going to take.
Yeah.
So.
All right, Nathan, we thank you. We really do hope you have a weekend for the